Good evening, everybody. First and foremost, thank you so much for the lovely talk and the presentation. Truly, it was very insightful for us all to navigate through this paper, and we do have a few questions, but at the end of the day, Nicolas would explain them as well. So to begin, this paper explores the determinants of wage remuneration and inequalities, focusing on two often overlooked dimensions, hierarchical powers and care work. It argues that traditional labor economies have primarily emphasized skills and routinized tasks intensity, which neglects the impact of managerial functions and care-based activities on wage dynamics. So there are two key concepts I would like to emphasize on, the first being the hierarchical power. The paper posed that decision-making powers within occupational structures that significantly influences wage dynamics. And when we talk about care work, it is the undervaluation of care jobs predominantly occupied by women who contributes to wage penalties and reflect broader societal vulnerabilities. If we talk about the methodology of the paper, the authors have introduced two novel indicators, one being job anatomy indicator, that captures the degree of organizational power in various occupations, and care activity indicator that accounts for the importance of care-related tasks in job profiling. The paper employs OLS and quantile regression models to analyze the impact of these indicators on wage and inequality. So if we talk about the main thesis of the paper, again, as mentioned earlier, it explores the traditional economic theories of wage determination, which primarily focus on human capital and skill-based factors, overlooking critical dimensions such as hierarchical power and the undervaluation of care work. So the authors argue that these neglect factors significantly contribute to wage inequality and dynamics, necessitating a broader understanding of labor values that incorporate organizational power and the essential nature of care-related occupation. So I was also like to mention some main findings of the paper, which one being the wage dynamics. That is, routine tasks are generally associated with lower wages, while non-routinized tasks command a premium. However, care jobs face persistent wage penalties despite their essential role, especially highlighted during the COVID-19 pandemic. And inequality drivers, where the analysis reveals the socio-institutional factors that the rise of care economy and weakened labor market institutions, which are critical in understanding wage disparities beyond the neoclassical framework. And finally, if we talk about the literature view, though there are multiple perspectives that have been posed in the paper, but the two main essential one, which I would like to emphasize, is the care job penalty, which is explained by devaluation theory, that explains that jobs predominantly held by women, particularly in care work, are undervalued in labor market due to historical socio-cultural subordination and compensating differential theory that suggests the lower wages in care work may be justified by intrinsic rewards associated with these roles, such as emotional fulfillment. And if we talk about the role of power in wages, which is explained by the Marxist theory of class conflicts, according to this perspective, wage levels are not solely determined by individual productivity, but are significantly influenced by power relations within the society. So moving on, Léna would take.
Thank you. So as Ahmed just explained, this paper represents a huge contribution for research by highlighting the role of hierarchical power and care work in shaping wage inequality. But it also felt like some points were missing or overlooked, and we wanted to discuss them today, starting with the capacity of institutions to influence these wage dynamics. So as you can see in the graph, in red it's Italy and in black it's OECD. Union density has sharply declined over the years, and this is particularly true for younger workers and those working in precarious sectors such as care, for instance. The erosion of this collective bargaining has shifted wage setting power almost exclusively to employers. In their paper, Baccaro and Howell argue that weakening union negotiation power and decentralized bargaining lead to an increase in wage dispersion as well as an increase in job insecurity. They also show that institutions such as trade union, labor laws, and collective bargaining mechanisms can actually act as a buffer against wage penalties and premiums. Studying the institutional context is therefore very important to understand these wage dynamics. And for instance, if we keep the same context as a paper and we take Italy, this is a country that has its own specificities that can further amplify wage inequality. The first one is the dual labor structure. On the one hand, we have precarious temporary contracts that are concentrated in care work and that face systemic under-evaluation. And on the other hand, we have stable long-term contracts that offer job security and higher wages. The country is also regionally divided between northern and southern Italy. In northern Italy, where trade unions are stronger and they support higher wages and greater stability, whereas in southern Italy, the trade unions are weaker and informal labor market exacerbate economic insecurity, which as a result also reinforce care work under evaluation. The thing is that if we ignore institutional dynamics and context, we also underestimate the systemic mechanisms that sustain these wage inequalities. And these dynamics can also be influenced by policies. Although your paper highlights the structural roots of inequality, it does not really discuss any policy recommendation that could directly address these issues. Firstly, in order to improve institutional context and reduce disparities between northern and southern Italy, Boccaro and Noel proposed to strengthen collective bargaining frameworks by reinstating collective agreements so that workers can be part of wage negotiation and ask for better protection sectorally but also nationally. Secondly, policies can also be implemented to address managerial premiums and care work penalties. For that matter, Wright raises the idea of workplace democratization. He advocates for co-determination laws that can involve workers in organizational decisions, which is believed to result in power redistribution as well as in lower wage gaps, because the workers would actually take part in wage determination processes within the firm. On his side, Piketty also proposes to introduce salary caps or heavy taxation on executive pay to better align wages with organizational contributions rather than on hierarchical position, as this is currently the case. In his opinion, redistributive policies are the only way to directly fight against excessive power accumulation and to mitigate top-level wage disparities. And lastly, in addition to public investment in care, sector-specific minimum wage for care must also be established to address care work penalties. Faubre indeed argues for wage structures that would integrate the social contribution of social reproduction and care work. The social value of care work should indeed be recognized, and the best way to do so, as we are in a capitalist society, is to do it through wages.
So we found the concept of capitalism interesting. In this paper, it was applied for social production, but it can also apply to other sectors like nature and public institutions, for example, and it's really showing how fragile the system is. For nature, for example, capitalism requires continuous growth, and this is not sustainable in the long run. You just have to look, for example, at the fact that 6 out of 9 of the planetary boundaries have been crossed right now. And for public institutions, capitalism is damaging healthcare and education, for example. We thought of talking about another big cause of inequality, which is inheritance. As Thomas Piketty showed, for example, on the graph on the left, you see that the annual inheritance share out of the national income in France has been increasing for the past decades. And we know that it's not everyone that receives the same amount of inheritance, and that's not based on merit whatsoever. On the graph on the right, we see that in Europe, the top 10%, the richest, received 55% of inheritance, while the bottom 50% received only 6% of their inheritance. And PSC proposes like universal inheritance, for example, that would be funded by progressive taxation, but we can think out of other measures to bring more equality also. On managers, now the paper is consistent with the thesis of Piketty and Sayers, for example, and so on, concerning the managers' remunerations, bringing more inequalities at the top, and the thesis of managerial capitalism. And this will be familiar with the people of Major B. Basically, Marc Lavoie showed that managers have been able to secure more profits from the financialization by increasing their payrolls with buybacks, bonuses, stock options, higher salaries. And without going too much into details, this is the managerial slack in the figure there. Basically, financialization meant that we shift the focus from growth to profits. And so you get more profits, but not all the profit is given to the managers and to finance growth. So the gap there is going to managers. Then conclusions, two novel indicators. We found that was really important. It's limiting the impact of technology on wage inequalities, and it's bringing more political points, and that's great. It's weakening the meritocracy ideology, and implications that are multiple, but we can think, for example, of rising the wages of care workers, especially the low-paid ones, and policies to limit the power of managers on wages, or to redistribute afterwards also. Before going to the questions, we thought of Graeber for the wages of inequalities. So basically what he said is that it is not true, the usual narrative of like saying that inequalities began after the agricultural revolution and with civilizations that brought inequalities because there was egalitarian cities before and after agriculture, for example. So that's bringing hope to what we can do at a large scale in terms of bringing more equality. But he also explained that most of the painful loss of human freedoms began at a small scale, for example, in gender relations, age groups, and domestic servitude, and that will be another challenge to bring more equality. So this is our questions, and thank you for listening. Yeah. Okay, I can read it, yeah. So saying that, okay, I can read. Since highlighting the role of occupational power on wages means considering the class conflict as opposed to the technology-driven mainstream view, it seems to explain why it hasn't been explored further before. Do you see it becoming more popular in the future, this type of analysis? And also, do you think this could impact policies? Given the decline in union power in Italy, how do you see the union density in collective bargaining interacting with the two determinants emphasized in your paper? Including such variables after findings?
Yeah, maybe last one. So the final question is, how does the increased automation and technological advancement in context of AI, now where Sam Altman, I would like to amend a little, has just said that they're very close to AGI in the labor market, affect the dynamics of care work and hierarchical power? Are there implications for future wage trends in these sectors? So thank you, Salim. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the kind discussion of our work. So So what can I say? So yes, with respect to the question, but also with respect to the points that you raised during your presentation, I really like how you try to, let's say, link the content of our work with other contribution of the literature, and also understand maybe the effort of reading some passages of the paper that maybe they were not trivial, let's say, for someone that is not used to read this type of stuff. So thank you very much for your dedicated reading of the paper. And first of all, with respect to the unionization, the role of unionization that also was underlined a lot during the initial part of the presentation. Yes, of course, unionization is something that is crucial, and in general, labor power is crucial to understand the wage dynamics that I explained. In terms of empirical study of this factor, it was not possible to include in our analysis any measure of unionization because unfortunately, data of union density are not so, let's say, detailed to cover occupation. So we have data on unionization rate at macro level. We can have data on workers that are covered by collective bargaining by sectors, but this type of data are not, at least in Italy, are not systematized in a way that can be operationalized in this type of analysis, where let's say, the object of the analysis is the occupation, let's say, the individual worker and the occupation. So it was not possible to link, but of course it's crucial. And for instance, one way through which we capture and took into account the fragmentation of, if you want, of the labor market that is also strictly related to the evolution of the institution is the inclusion in our analysis of the temporary job contract. We distinguish, we looked at the impact on wages depending on the type of contract that you have, if temporary, permanent or part-time. And indeed, if you look at the evolution in the last 30 years of the Italian economy, you see that structural labor reforms were essentially introduced to increase the unstable and temporary work that also in the end weakened the capability of unions to intervene and to bargain on wages and working conditions, because the more, of course, the more precarious is the labor force, the more difficult is also to gather these workers together, to make them unionized, and to then build up a bargaining power that can affect the wage dynamics. And this is essentially also especially the case of care workers, because essential workers are usually employed in sectors that are characterized by low union density. If you think about domestic workers that are mainly informal workers that are not covered even by job contract, but also cleaning workers, cleaners, workers that are working in the food preparation in canteen, even universities. So these type of workers are usually hired through labor agency, so they are not hired directly by the, let's say, the employer, the place in which they work, but there are intermediary agents that hire them. This is called the so-called domestic outsourcing. Is a way of outsourcing part of the labor activity that is not considered as core, as a core activity. So it's a way to reduce costs, labor costs, and also to increase, let's say, the precariousness, and also to move, if you want, the risk, the economic risk from the main employer to the individual workers. Because if you don't have a permanent job relation, of course, in case of downturns, in case of economic crisis, it will be easier to fire you. So, of course, the unionization dynamic, but in general, the regulation of the labor market that have characterized the last 30 years, not only in Italy, but in most European countries, is a factor that needs to be taken into account. And is linked also to a structural change, if you want, in economic policies, because if you then compare, with respect to 70s, the relation between, if you look at the functional distribution of income and you see how was the labor share over the total income produced in advanced economies in 70s, and you look at it now, you see that there is really a transfer of a value of resources from labor to capital. So all these elements are clearly connected, but we could not, let's say, integrated them into the analysis just because of a lack of data. But yes, unionization is crucial. This on unionization. Then about the cannibal, also like the let's say at the end, when you underlined how actually the concept of cannibal capitalism that was introduced by Fraser in one of a recent book can be also applied to other sector, other issues, other spheres, let's say. And of course, the nature is one of the most important. And indeed, even in the feminist approach, there are some feminist scholars that try to make this link between, let's say, the nature, also the worsening, the exploitation of natural resources, and also the neglection of the role of care and social reproduction. So this link is already, let's say, highly debated and discussed in the literature of so-called ecofeminists, and of course is important, because if you want also, the development of capitalism in some sense is really based on the exploitation of these two resources that indeed are not infinite, even the social reproduction sphere, so the human, the labor force, but also of course the nature. So yes, this is totally the point, one of the main point. Then another important point that was also raised about how to deal with the premium, let's say, manager hierarchical power, wage premium, and one of the proposals was making democratize the work context, and also introducing caps. Yes, this of course is part of the story, is a way, let's say, institutional tools can be adopted in order to deal and to control this gap, and also fiscal rules can be crucial. If you look at the evolution of the fiscal rules and how much they are not able to take into account this inequality, such that, as some scholars of my university have shown, actually the fiscal taxes are more detrimental for low wages than for high wage workers. Of course, changing the fiscal system could be part of the story, but clear if the power relation within the society are reflecting the type of inequality that you observe in the labor market, it becomes very difficult to advance in this sense. And as also you already said, the evolution of wages of managers cannot be we cannot understand it without accounting for the financialization of firms, of productive organization, that has a crucial role, and maybe the people of Major B have studied a lot this point. This is crucial, and even as we did in our classes, not only the financialization of the firms and productive structure is affecting the wage inequality, but is also affecting the innovative capabilities of firms, as we saw, because even the tool of buybacks is able to generate capital gains without any innovation. So it's also actually affecting not only the wage, the social justice part of the society, but also the capability then of firms of creating value, of innovating and contributing to the development of society. And then last on the AI development and how this type of analysis can contribute to the debate in the future. I mean, I start from my take on technological change is that technological change is not something exogenously driven, but is actually the reflection, and is shaped by also power relation, not only by innovative capabilities of society, but also of power relation. Decisions on the impact on how technological change then affect the labor sphere is not given a priori. Is determined and takes a specific shape because of the context in which is adopted, because of the role of actors, because of the power resources that actors have and the capability they have to bargain. So not only the type of adoption depends on all these elements, but on also then the redistribution of resources and let's say the profit and of the advantages of this technological change will depend on the different power resources. So I could not give you let's say a prognostic about the future, because yes, as Clash said, the future is unwritten, but of course the future will not be so different from the society in which we live. And so if you want the adoption of artificial intelligence, the adoption of more automated advanced technologies may probably increase and worsen working conditions and wage inequalities, not because of the technology itself, but because of the specific characteristic of the institution and power relation that characterize contemporary society. There could be also another type of another story. For instance, as Keynes was telling us many years ago, technological advancement should be used to reduce the number of working hours and allow workers to have a lot of free time. Actually, if you look now at the working time, working hours are not decreasing anymore, are actually increasing. There are a lot of people that are doing more jobs in order to have a good wage. So adoption, impact, and the redistribution of resources are not given, but strictly related to the context in which they are adopted. And I hope that this type of analysis can contribute to the debate, but then, as you know, also the publication, let's say the system of publication, the debate of economics is not always so pluralistic. You are doing a master that is thanks to David and many other professors that allow you to have access to a lot of interesting and heterodox and critical perspective, but this is not, let's say, the general debate that you find in economics. So you need to take into account that the battle of ideas is also something that then you find in the outside EPOG, let's say. That's it. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Domitila from Italy as well. You kind of already answered to this question. Like, would it be possible, like, to add like some elements of like ethnicity or like socio-cultural background in this type of analysis, and also get like more disaggregated data about like the regional division of labor, and of course like providing information on the north-south divide in Italy?
We take 2 or 3 questions.
Thank you. I'm Jan from Germany. I was wondering how a study like this could also take into account unpaid care work. So, I mean, you showed that power and gender really determine the wages within the official jobs, but they also determine what counts as a job at all, or what is paid at all. And yeah, maybe you have any ideas how to operationalize this for a study.
Not yet, already 2.
It's a tour de force. Yes, thank you very much for the questions, and also in general for the attention, so that you are very focused, I hope, to my listening me. So yes, ethnicity, of course, is possible to account, and for this, again, it depends on the data availability. In labor force, Italian labor force, you have data about in terms of immigration status, country of origin, so you can integrate this into the analysis. And then in that case, it will be very interesting not only to look at, of course, the role of ethnicity, so account for a dummy that control for distinguished workers, but then look at the interaction between other variables of interest, like see the care and ethnic background, and to see how they combine in a big, I imagine, a wage penalty effect. Yes, this of course is important. I think that in the data version that we have, this variable was not available. That's why we didn't use, or there were a lot of missing values. So geographical divides, yes, this actually was also a point in the presentation. We control for this, and we distinguish between among macro regions, and of course then the element is consistent with the empirical facts of the Italian economy. You see that the south is characterized by even higher wage penalty, whereas the north experience a better better record in terms of wage levels. But then in the case of south, and this is connected to the other question, there is a big problem, a big issue, especially with respect to female employment, that you have a lot of inactive female workers, let's say, women that are result to be inactive in the sense that they are not looking for a job, they are not in the education system, and they are not unemployed. They are just not doing, let's say, anything, but actually they are not doing anything, because in the majority of the case, these women are highly engaged in performing all the domestic care unpaid job activities that are needed in order when you are in a family, when you are children, or you have elderly people that you have to take care. And this is a big problem, if you want, from a labor economist perspective. How we account for unpaid work in this type of analysis. We can't in terms of data, because we don't have data, systematic data on unpaid work in the case of Italy. There is a type of survey that is widely adopted to capture unpaid care work, that is time surveys. In US, you have a periodic time surveys. I think every year, or anyways, a periodic time survey. So you can also build some longitudinal type of analysis where families are asked how much time, family members are asked how much time do they spend performing different type of activities. So here you can really appreciate this, the amount and the role of unpaid work. In the case of Italy, we have some version of this time survey, but I think there are 2 or 3, and they are there were not recent publications, so it's difficult to treat this type of data. That's why most of the analysis of unpaid work are usually qualitative type of analysis. We are not using statistics, let's say labor force statistics, but we are doing surveys, interviews, case studies, which are also very important, but let's say are not the common type of analysis done in economics. It's more a sociological or interdisciplinary type of analysis that is absolutely very interesting, but it's a different type of analysis. But yes, of course, this is crucial, and actually this link to another point that was suggested in the presentation about infrastructure, public, let's say, public care jobs. This is very important. I mean, one of the proposals coming from feminists, and not only feminists, many scholars and people, let's say, movements, is a big investment in so-called social infrastructures. Social infrastructures are all the infrastructure that should be able to address people needs in terms of physical needs, cognitive needs, relational needs, care needs, okay? What is very important with this idea of social infrastructure, that some feminist scholars like Francesca Bittio and other economists of the In Genere group have studied the impact of creating this social infrastructure on the overall employment level, and they see that the multiplier is very high, because with one policy measure you are doing a lot of things. First of all, you are providing care services that are crucial, for instance, for kids between 0 and 3 years old. And so these kids children have the possibility to access to public services and also start to be integrated in the society. You are making women able to look for jobs in a period in which usually you see a lot of women that exit from the labor market and they don't enter anymore. You are creating jobs that should be well-paid jobs, and you are probably also able to attract male workers. So with good wages, maybe men will start also to enter into this type of job, and so you are reducing gender segregation. So you are acting, this is really a type of policy measures that has an important impact in terms of social justice, emancipation of women, and also, let's say, increasing opportunity also for male workers to have access to good jobs. So yes, it's a win-win scenario, but then, let's say, the policies that are now adopted in Europe are going on a completely different direction, as we know.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Mariano from Nicaragua. Do you think that the analysis could change if we divide the care jobs between public sector and private sector? And if it also can change the sign of the coefficient between private sector will be positive and public sector will be negative?
I was about to ask something similar. So, well, my name is Kamal from Costa Rica. I would like to know about how it works, the labor contracts in Italy. How it possible let's say that there is gaps between men and women if contracts are similar. This is happening between time in the terms of negotiation of a second year salary increase, or even from the first year of contract, there are salary gaps between men and women. And also, if you have made the research, is there any gap also between female being mother or female single female?
Hi. Just thinking, maybe this is more like a sociological dilemma, but thinking on generalizing the results. My name and the country, Jocelyn from Costa Rica. Yeah, it's very hard to find two in a very small group. So I was thinking, like, maybe like thinking on generalizing your results across countries. Is there like maybe any variable that can account for like maybe how the countries value power or like care work? Like thinking on, because these change according countries and how like gender gaps and everything. Have you think on that? Thank you.
Thank you. Difference between care public sector and private sector, in some sense, this difference emerges in an autonomous way from our analysis, in the sense that the health sector is still mainly public. Then it's changing, but it's still mainly public. But that in that case, I will not interpret and infer the higher wages of health sector as related to the public, the fact of that the sector is public, but also because of the nature of the occupation. But certainly, the public sector has represented an obstacle to wage compression, because of a tradition of higher unionization of employees in the public sector, and better working condition and job contract stability. Then it's changing a lot. For instance, the practice of domestic outsourcing is mainly used also in the public sector, because it is also pushed by a new approach of public sector activities that is so-called the public management, according to which also public sectors need to be accountable in terms of profits, costs, so they have to reduce costs, and they are adopting some practices that usually you find in the private sector. So, of course, the private, at least in Italy, the public sector can be an obstacle to worsening dynamics, but at the same time is also a sector characterized by very low wages. In general, in Italy is a country characterized by very low wage and low wage stagnation, in the sense that in the last 20, 30 years, wages have not increased a lot. So it's complicated, let's say, but certainly is an interesting point. With respect to the gap between men and women, yes, this is an important point, actually, that I did not explain. Actually, if you look at the gender wage gap, generally at the gender wage gap, in the case of Italy, you don't find a big gender wage gap, in the sense that workers that perform the same occupation, a man performing the same occupation of a woman with the same characteristics, is not earning on average much more than a woman. There is a wage gap, but it's not so big. Why? Because there is no discrimination dynamic in the wage setting, in the sense that if you perform an occupation, the wage is the same if you're a woman or a man. The wage, the minimum entry level, the wage level with which you start. The problem is that there are a lot of additional factors that can contribute to the determination of your wage, like the career, like the payment over time allowances, the gaps, the periods in which you not work, that then contribute to this wage gap. So the wage gap is not institutionalized, because this will be a discrimination that is not possible. You cannot discriminate on the basis of gender, race, etc., etc. But in practice, because of the way labor is organized, the labor process is organized, and because of the neglection of social reproduction and the fact that women perform a lot of care work, in the end, the result to have this big wage penalty. When you account for inactivity, when you account for job career, when you account for other potential wage premium, which in theory you have access to, but you don't actually don't have access because you don't have the time that is needed to perform additional activities, and so on and so forth. And what is very scaring, if you want, and depressing, is that when you look at the impact of motherhood and fatherhood on wage level for women and men, and you see that in the case of female, you have a motherhood penalty, in the sense that when you have kids, children, then this determines a reduction, a decline in your wage that you are not able to overcome anymore, because then you usually you go out from the market, then you go back, and so on and so forth. In the case of men, is the opposite. You find usually, also in the case of France, also an interesting analysis made by some colleagues, where you have a fatherhood premium. So once you have so the same event has a different impact, let's say, on your job opportunity, and even maybe on the social recognition that you get from your changing status. Okay, and then it was all. Yes, thank you very much. In general, let's say care jobs are usually related. Usually record a wage penalty, but there are important differences depending on the welfare regimes. There are classifications or taxonomy of welfare regimes where, for instance, the presence and the availability of social infrastructures can clearly contribute to positive increasing wages and completely different scenario. This is also, this has been studied a lot in the feminist approach, for especially in European case, that is the one that I know better, where you when you can compare the Nordic case of countries where you have a lot of paternity and maternity leave, paid leave, you have kindergarten, public kindergarten, and so on and so forth, where you see that care jobs in general are paid better than in case of Italy. Let's say the case of Italy is particularly complicated because it's a southern country where you have a lot of weaknesses in terms of institution infrastructure. But yes, in general, you have this penalty, but the degree and intensity of this wage penalty can be strongly affected by the institution and the welfare regime of the country.
Hello, I'm Fazli from last cohort. I thank you very much for the presentation. I really found it interesting, and the anatomy index that you proposed, I found it really intriguing. And I have a question, maybe slightly outside the scope of the research that you are doing, maybe the research that you will do or you are considering. Since the index that you created is mainly driven by the power section of your index, have you considered making a more disaggregated analysis with power, creative and cognitive work, and the rest? And maybe the time trends, since maybe the theory will be, since managerial work is getting more and more routinized, it might be having less and less effect, while cognitive and creative over time is having. So that was my question.
And you see that students can become addicted to join seminars.
Yes, incredible. Wow, the family, EPOG family. Thank you, nice to see you. Yes, actually, we did this at the beginning. This was object of debate with my co-authors. Do we need to use all the factors or not? And in the end, the results are quite consistent in the sense that you have a power that is clearly even higher, of course, alone. And the other that also ICT skills has a positive impact on wages. And creative, since creative it was one of the factors with the lowest level of variance, its capability also of capturing wage differences is not so big, but still it was, I don't remember now the sign, but let's say we have done this, but then given that the paper is already very rich, we thought that it was too much to make this type of analysis, but yes, we have done it, and it's true that it's important, at least as preliminary type of analysis, to see where we are going with then a composite indicator. But we believe that adopting a synthetic indicator could be more easily also for the public, for people to understand. With respect to the time trend, yes, this will be very interesting, but the fact is that the ECP is there are only 2 waves, so we use the second one, yes, only 2 waves, and now they should publish the 3rd wave. So you have a wave that, let's say, cover 3 years in some sense. So you are not able, in the case of Italy, to look at the evolution over time, but this you can do with IONET, because the IONET is published every year. So you can do this type of analysis, let's say, of time variation of occupational attributes among occupations, which is very interesting. And of course, this is one of, let's say, also the key, maybe one of the key issues to look at with all the automation and AI, age, etc. If you want to combine labor analysis with technological analysis. So yes, thank you. Okay.
Any other question? I was just wondering also, I mean, there is the issue of power, the issue of caring about people, but if you take the environment, isn't it the same? I mean, those who have the power to destroy the environment get much higher wages. Those who care about environment will probably have lower wages. Do you?
Yes, this can be hierarchical power and care 2.0 in the age of environmental crisis. Yes, of course. I mean, maybe the answer goes back to one of the questions, how to link this idea of cannibal capitalism with the different spheres of the society that are under attack. And of course, then in the environmental, fight, in the environmental crisis, you can find some of the elements that we also identify here. Of course, it's part of the very complex story we have to study altogether. I think so. Thank you.